Labour's plan to stop the boats, how to fix the country without spending more money, and does staying married make Britain more successful? This is Politics Live. Joining me in the studio, Conservative MP Danny Kruger, Labour's Dame Angela Eagle, Liberal Democrat Layla Moran, and hopefully later on, Conservative Home's Deputy Editor Henry Hill. Today, Keir Starmer's on a mission to persuade you he can stop small boats, but will it mean accepting more migrants?
We have to stop these boats coming across the channel, and the only effective way to do that is to ensure that we smash the gangs.
His plans today seem to amount to saying that we might one day accept 100,000 EU migrants every year.
Don't expect us to splash the cash. That's the message coming from the two main parties.
Spending is not going to increase by as much as people hoped.
Labour will not play fast and loose with the public finances.
But can a government transform your life without spending money? And our guest thinks marriage is the key to a stable society. Is it? Have we lost our work ethic? One Australian tycoon thinks we have.
There's been a systematic change where employees feel the employer is extremely lucky to have them, as opposed to the other way around.
Well, let's start with attitudes to work. That was the Australian property developer Tim Gurner you heard there at the end of the headlines, his thoughts about workers post-pandemic. But let's have a look at this headline from earlier in the week in The Times. Giving it only 85% is key to avoiding burnout. Just ask Hugh Jackman, the actor. Well, let's start with that question. How much effort do you put into work? How much have you put in this week? 85% or higher?
Well, I mean, as MPs, I think all busy professionals feel the same. You're always feeling you're not delivering enough. You're working really hard. You do very long hours. You know, our time, sort of, as it were, in public, in Parliament, in the Chamber, on TV, is only a tiny fraction of our work. We have huge amounts of casework to do. Each individual MP does a lot of that. So I think there's something to be said for varying the load, and we're just about to go on another 4-week recess. We've only just come off a recess. I think there's something to be said for...
Well, Tim Gurner will say you're being a bit lazy.
But on the other hand, I mean, I'm sure my colleagues will agree, actually the work doesn't stop when we're away from Parliament.
Layla?
Well, in terms of what we do away from Parliament, absolutely the work does not stop.
But do you put in 100%?
Well, it's really interesting. So, I mean, I think trying to keep it to 85% all the time in order to maintain productivity, I do think that bad decisions can quite often get made if you're running at 120%, which I hate. I'm a maths teacher. You can't give more than 100%. It doesn't work that way. But the point being, you can run yourself ragged, and that can lead to poor decision-making or very reactionary work. I work really hard with my team to think, you know, strategically, is this the right thing to do? Actually, sometimes saying no to something is as important as saying yes to something. And we're very mindful of burnout, because burnout is a bad thing and can lead to periods where you end up sick and so therefore not working at all. So I think there is something to be said for, you know, trying to find a balance, but it is a nonsense to think that there aren't periods where it's just mad. And I'm sure every job is like that.
Angela, what about your effort this week? Has it been 100%?
I think you've got to get work-life balance right, because otherwise you're not in a fit state to perform properly. So I think you've got to be aware of burnout, and you've also got to be aware that there'll be times when your effort's got to be close to 100%. But, you know, we all have to sleep. We all have to travel from one place to another. And I think in jobs where it isn't set hours and the demand is virtually infinite, you've got to prioritise and strategise. I have to say, listening to a billionaire talking about his workforce like that, I don't think he's got the balance right at all. And I have to say, the best working environments are where people actually work together as partnerships. They're not those command kind of environments where people are brutalised and told what to do and how much effort to give by the person that's raking it in when they're probably not.
Well, do you think there has been a bit of slacking since the pandemic and the way, obviously, this guy thinks, Tim Gurner?
Well, I think we saw something interesting happening during the pandemic. We saw a retreat to the home, which I'm in favour of as a principle. I think something brilliant happened, actually, when families could stay together, people became more neighbourly, people were able to balance their work and their home life better. But it's also true, I'm afraid to say, a lot of people decided they quite like not working. They certainly like not going into the office. And I do think we've got a chronic productivity problem in our country, in the public sector and the private sector. We do, I mean, I agree with Angela's last point there, but you also do need, as a boss, to get the best out of your workforce. And we do need to be encouraging people to go back to the office.
I mean, the productivity problem happened
existed.
before
Well, it's existed
the pandemic, Danny. I mean,
for well over a decade.
Certainly.
And also we've had stagnant productivity since 2016. So that's a complex issue. It's not only about
since 2008, I think. Really.
Well, it's not only, but it's stopped growing at all since 2016. And I actually think that productivity and unlocking some of that by having much more cooperative workforces is a key to growing our economy in this country.
I'm going to introduce what looks like our fourth panellist now. Same name, Henry Zeffman, though, BBC's chief political correspondent. While you're here, what about the percentage of effort you're giving to work at the moment?
Nothing.
100%.
Yeah, of course it is.
Until I pass my probation.
Yes, which you will with flying colours, of course. Layla, on that issue, though, which way round should it be? That employees think their bosses are lucky to have them, or the other way round?
I think it should be both, ideally. I mean, you know, if you run a good team, then I consider myself very lucky to work with a team I work with. We all bring different things. I hire them that way. I hire people who challenge me. I hire people who have different ideas, and I do that quite purposefully. But equally, you know, we've all got our role to play. And if someone is not quite making it work, I often actually look at myself first. Am I not providing them with the training they need? Are they doing things that actually they think I want, but actually I don't want? And I start there. And, you know, sometimes if the fit's not there, you've got to go through a process. But, you know, this is just good employment practice. I'm not really sure what he's trying to say other than create a bit of a headline. But if it gets...
He's apologised, funnily enough, for the comments. I should say that, I suppose.
Well, I'm not surprised because he's probably got half his workforce that's resigned off the back of it.
Well, that's for him to deal with. Let's move on. Let's talk about immigration and also the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, because he has been in The Hague, in Netherlands, meeting senior European law enforcement officials at Europol. Starmer has set out how he's actually going to try and forge a new security agreement with the EU, because it is an EU law enforcement agency, to tackle small boats. What does it mean in practice, Angela?
Well, I think it means an attempt to integrate what has been disintegrated since we left the European Union. So real-time cooperation on threats. If you treat people smugglers like you would treat terrorists, if they come through the borders, they get flagged up. You know in real time who's where, what's going on. Much better coordinated cooperation, getting National Crime Agency staff over working in Europol. These are cross-border issues, and you can't tackle them except by working collaboratively and cooperatively cross-border. So the more you disintegrate your systems from each other, the less effective you're going to be.
Yeah, well, the UK left the EU, and with that went the seat on the board of Europol, and Eurojust, I think it's called. Henry, what's the difference between what Sir Keir Starmer is suggesting in tackling small boats and what the Conservatives say they've been trying to do?
Well, there definitely is a difference in emphasis, and it was interesting that Angela went straight to the cooperation with EU countries and the sort of consequences of Brexit for this policy area there, because I think this is an area where Keir Starmer seems happy to publicly say that he wants closer cooperation with the European Union. Obviously, on the sort of big-ticket Brexit items, the Labour Party has moved some way since 2019. They say, obviously, not going back into the European Union, but also single market membership off the table, customs union membership off the table. But I think this is an example of an area where Keir Starmer is very keen to emphasise that he does want closer cooperation with the European Union. And that is a difference of tone, I think, from the government and from the Prime Minister.
Has he got it right, Danny?
Well, he's just repeating what we're doing anyway. There's a huge amount of cooperation going on with the EU, but crucially with individual member states of Europe as well. So Angela's right. Of course there needs to be cooperation. This can't just be fixed from our end. But the fundamental reality is we need to have an effective barrier against illegal migration. And what I find extraordinary about Blair, mentioned Blair, he's behind this.
An interesting Freudian slip.
Well, it's not actually Freudian.
We'll get on to
It's interesting the role of Blair, and in fact the Blairite human rights framework, which is at the core of our problems with illegal immigration. What we need to be able to do is to stop people coming, and if they do come, remove them quickly. And the Labour Party has voted against all of the measures that we're putting in place.
I mean, hang on, let you finish sentence.
And what they're now proposing to do is to take in another 100,000 according to the quota.
Where'd you get that number from?
Because the way the quota works in the EU is well, what you do is you divide the way the EU works is it has a quota system depending on the size of your economy, and they apportion the number of migrants that they receive each year to the members of the scheme. And if we're proposing to join the scheme under Starmer, we would be liable to take 100,000 new illegal migrants from Europe, in addition, of course, to all of the ones who arrive here illegally because they don't propose to remove them.
That figure does sound like it's been somewhat plucked from thin air. But anyway, on that, how many would we be taking then?
Well,
if it's not 100,000
it's
in your
interesting to hear that the Prime Minister's been out condemning this, and it's all over the Daily Mail, this £100,000 figure, and how awful it is that we would be negotiating with the EU. But Rishi Sunak a month ago said that he wanted to negotiate precisely the same thing with the EU.
And so how many people would we be talking about?
I have to say, well, that would depend on negotiations. But the key thing here is the government isn't doing the day job. It's passing legislation that is unworkable, which is why we've opposed it. And it's actually not doing the day job. Returns are down from 10,000 a year when we were in government to 3,000 a year. There's been a third cut in the number of prosecutions. A lot of these people smugglers are performing with virtual impunity because the government aren't doing the day job. They are not processing new arrivals. They are not processing applications.
Well, they have employed more people to do it, but it is relatively recent. I just want to ask, Leila, presumably you welcome closer cooperation with the EU in whatever form.
Of course, and not just this and elsewhere. And I mean, I think the point around processing, though, is really, really key, because for all of this, this is the front end. The fact is, the back end, the Home Office is not doing its job. When we first started talking about this, we knew there was a backlog of 160,000. We're now at 175. That's up 44% since this time last year. The fact is, the government doesn't have a clue what's going on. This might help, but, you know, I don't think it's just going to be on this that we need to have broader EU cooperation. The big issue here is that the Home Office hasn't got a clue what to do with any of this, and I think it's pretty rich for Sunak to come out and lambast it. It's what they have already been doing. It's what they need to do, actually. There is nothing between us, I don't think, in getting people who are here illegally out of the country. And it's really important to stress that. I don't want people who are criminals coming here and staying.
Where would you send them?
Well, you know what?
If their countries won't take them back.
First, because the vast majority
and they don't have
of
documents.
people...
Where would you send them? If there aren't returns agreements, there is one with Albania.
There needs to be return. And we used to return many more. But the key issue is we don't know who they are. We need safe and legal routes, so they aren't incentivised to get on a boat in the first place.
And from which countries would you have safe and legal routes?
From wherever, because you've got...
Wherever?
Because
what would
under
the limit be on that?
international
Would that be
law...
capped? Would your safe and legal route be capped?
Law, if you are a refugee, you have every right to try and claim asylum in any country.
There are 100 million people in the world who would qualify for that.
The issue we have at the moment is that because of the way that our rules are operating, they are incentivised to get on a boat because you can't actually even fill in an application form until you hit British soil. That is incentivising people to come here.
All right, Henry, just a little bit of analysis around this figure that Rishi Sunak, we played it in the headlines and Danny has repeated it, 100,000. That would be the quid pro quo, the deal, the exchange that we would do with the EU. Do you know where that figure comes from? Is it part of a quota system?
It probably would be if the UK were an EU member state and therefore were compelled into this via EU membership. But what Keir Starmer is talking about is negotiating some sort of bespoke agreement. Now, look, who knows what that would be further down the track? I mean, but as Angela says, Rishi Sunak, we're told there was a lengthy leak to the Times about it a few months ago, also wanted a bespoke returns agreement. Now, speak to people in government today, they say, well, you know, if that negotiation had come off, it absolutely wouldn't have included a quota. But then, of course, the Labour Party could say, well, we're not going to include a quota either. I mean, I suspect, you know, it's one of those issues where it's, you know, a battle of the rhetoric this side of the general election.
But the thing that the government can do is actually get the day job properly sorted and start processing
So that
these
is happening.
people.
So, Angela, you're absolutely right, and Leila's right. quite rightly, I think, to criticise historically the Home Office for not processing people quickly enough. That is now rapidly improving, and including the number of small boats are coming down as well. So there is progress, but I'm not complacent at all. I don't think we're doing nearly enough. We need to be much more robust, and we need to get the courts to accept our Rwanda policy, which will remove people and will be really
when's that
effective.
likely to be? Not until October, November time, so
indeed.
it's still not got off the ground.
The Rwanda policy, I'm sorry, the Rwanda policy takes 200 people. We've had 3,005 people arrive since the beginning of September.
But as you said, there've hardly been any returns anyway.
Just performance.
Let me just show you this tweet from my colleague Lena Nathu. Sir Keir Starmer tells BBC's Mark Easton a future Labour government would end the use of hotels for asylum seekers within 12 months of coming to office. That sounds a little bit like a pledge from Rishi Sunak to stop the boats. How's he going to achieve that?
Well, you have to do the day job. You've got to do the day job and process people
Where would they go?
And decide.
Well, I think
where would they go?
Well, you'll have to ask the people that are on the front bench. That's the first I've heard of it. But the thing is, if the Home Office did the detailed job of processing people effectively, returning them effectively, having proper international agreements and cooperation, dealing with the problem further down the pipeline, smashing the criminal gangs, then we'd be in a much better position. And in fact, we were when we were last in government.
Right. I mean, that may be a great aspiration. Do you think it's achievable?
Well, I mean, I sincerely hope what Angela's saying is what they intend to do this, because my concern is I've got Campsfield House Immigration Detention Centre in Kidlington, which is in my constituency. We fought hard for many decades to close it. In 2018, it did close, and it's on the list of ones that the government is now planning to reopen, along with another in Gosport. I sincerely hope that under the next Labour government, they will do what they agreed with us at the time was the right thing to do, was to keep Campsfield closed. And I'm concerned that actually all they're going to do is shunt them into somewhere like Campsfield House in Kidlington. So I've got questions about this policy as well.
You'd welcome that, of course.
If you're not...
Danny.
Thanks, Angela. So, well, of course, in principle, that's absolutely right. We're spending
because you failed to do it. You failed to do it.
It hasn't been done yet. Yeah. We've got to improve the efficiency of the system. That's absolutely right. Part of that, of course, is
quite a long time to do it.
Well, it is happening. Of course, one of the big challenges, of course, is all the left-wing lawyers who frustrate every single application. We need to work on that. But fundamentally, the real problem is the supply of people who are coming to this country, because at the moment, if you get here, you will be allowed to stay. And that is a policy that the other parties support. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who would be eligible for refugee status under the rules that Layla set out. If we are prepared to accept them all and to give them a home in this country, they will keep coming. So we have to have an absolute deterrent that if you arrive in this country illegally, you will not be able to stay. That is the only way to stop the boats. And the other parties will not accept that.
Well, all right. I mean, that is a dispute, obviously, between yourselves, the Liberal Democrats, and
the government. No, it's not. That's international law.
Well, as the government likes to say, they've passed legislation which makes that crossing.
That's right. And our country is
illegal.
Sovereign.
As I say, we can dispute that. Let me just show Henry and everyone else this tweet. Keir Starmer, Labour leader, I said he's arrived at The Hague. There's the picture. Labour will restore the security of Britain's borders. Good to be in The Hague to set out how. What do you make generally about this engagement from Leader of the Opposition? We don't have a date for the general election yet. We hear that he's going to see the French President Emmanuel Macron next week. It all sounds like a government in waiting.
And before he goes to see Macron, he's going to be in Montreal this weekend at a conference of centre-left leaders. Seems like it's quite possible he'll end up seeing Justin Trudeau if their schedules align, which is the classic sort of politicians get out clause in case it doesn't quite come off for whatever reason. But look, I mean, it's definitely a thing that Keir Starmer's team are very keen to do. You know, they've taken the Labour Party from a position when he became leader where, frankly, the idea that he might be Prime Minister within one term was fanciful, and now the polling position is very different, and it looks very plausible that he might become Prime Minister. Now, you know, I think successive leaders of the Conservative Party might have helped a bit with that, but nevertheless, that's where Keir Starmer is, and now his people want to find a way to sort of project him as a leader. I mean, I think the real prize that they want at some point is a moment in the Oval Office with Joe Biden. And whether they can make that happen before the election will be fascinating to see.
Well, you're looking very sceptical there, Dan. Is it humiliating, though, for Rishi Sunak and the government that he's striding the world stage, meeting French president?
I think the more the public see Starmer cozying up to Justin Trudeau, and
that was his dad.
That's right. I'm thinking of the old guys. Joe Biden, the other ancient, the other relic of the left, and indeed Macron. The more they'll realise what they're dealing with here, and it's a shame that we don't actually know what Starmer himself stands for. I mean, he can go around trying to associate himself with these other left-wing leaders, but the real question that the public wants to know is, what kind of Prime Minister would you be? And the great question remains what he actually believes, what he'd do. Today is the most depressing instance of that. He's literally going back to the EU as the only answer. The only way of identifying a distinct policy is to rejoin. You have said, Danny,
that is what you want to do too in terms of collaboration.
Well, I'm all for collaboration, but he's proposed to rejoin the scheme that allows for transfers of migrants within
and
the
on
EU.
That, is that how you... hang on, though. Is that how you've calculated the figure of 100,000 in terms of exchange?
Well, he is proposing to join the scheme whereby the EU distributes its migrants across members of the scheme, whether that's in the EU or not. That he thinks that that's the right scheme. He wants to be part of it. That's the number that we would get if that happened. I mean, good luck to him if he's going to try and negotiate some different scheme with the EU. They haven't been very good at, they haven't been very compliant with us so far. They might be with him, who knows?
Henry Zeffman, thank you for joining us. And hopefully we'll have the other Henry too. But it was great to have you here. Let's talk about your book, Danny, called Covenant, The New Politics of Home, Neighbourhood and Nation. We've picked out this quote: the normative family, held together by marriage, by mother and father sticking together for the sake of the children, is the only possible basis for a safe and successful society. Why?
Well, that was a quote actually from a speech I gave, not the book, but the book makes the case for marriage as well, so thank you. The argument I'm trying to make is that what really matters to us in our lives, each of us as individuals, is the relationships that we have, and that starts with the home and the family, but it's also the relationships of our neighbourhood and of our country. And I think politics needs to reflect that, and I think it's right that government concerns itself with these things. So that's why I supported Brexit, because I think the nation matters. I'm a localist, I believe in neighbourhood.
You say the only possible basis for a safe...
Well, the basis, so yes, thank you. So what I didn't mean, and I regret that people got the wrong impression from some of the reporting from that remark in my speech, is that this is the only way that you can live well. Of course you can't. We all know from our own experience and friends and family of our own that you don't have to be married to have a stable and happy life or a good family. But the argument I'm making, if you'll allow me, is that I think it's right that government supports and endorses marriage and family stability in all its forms, because that is the basis of a good society. We can't just have a lot of disconnected individuals. We need to have strong relationships.
Are you against, say, a family with kids where they're happily married but it's two mothers?
No, so I'm not against anything. And no, thank you for asking. Absolutely not. And I completely see in all sorts of ways how non-normative, non-traditional family forms can be extremely successful. And of course, we all know how many normative traditional families are unsuccessful and very dysfunctional, and it'd be much the best thing for everyone for them to separate. So please do not pretend that I'm suggesting that's the only way to live. Thank you for giving me the chance to clear up, because I did get criticised for saying something that I think is actually not contentious at all, which is that it is a good thing for people to stay together if they can. It's a good thing for children to be brought up by both their parents, if that's possible, and that it's right for government to try and support families, because that is what most people want. Most people want to get married, stay married, bring their kids up together. And at the moment, there are so many pressures, many of them induced by the government, by its fiscal tax and spend policy, by public services.
We're going to come on to some of the policies, but just broadly on what
can I just say, this seems to be a book that's nostalgic about the things that Thatcherism and the economic stuff that went along with it have actually destroyed.
I'm a critic of much of that.
Poverty destroys families, lack of access to housing destroys families, work with wages that don't pay destroy families. Taking away most of the money that local authorities have, so they have to export their homeless away from the place, makes place ridiculous. Having a situation where working does not supply you with the needs that you have in life destroys families. That is the Tory legacy of being in government. That is what you have delivered as a political party.
So I am a critic
Thatcherism.
So I'm a critic of much of what has happened, I'm afraid to say, both under our watch and under Labour's watch over the last generation and more. I think we have, as a society, parties of both stripes, disaggregated these associations, neighbourhoods and families that give us security and meaning and well-being and ultimately our freedom. So I'm not going to actually dispute much of that criticism, Angela, although I think that we do need to go deeper than just tax and spend policy. It's about our culture and it's about the way we live and the sort of communities that we create together. And I was a great fan of the big society because I thought Cameron there was
David
trying.
I think it was an excuse to cut
I know that's what you think, but
benefits.
actually there was an effort then, and I regret we didn't do more of that. We do need stronger local communities.
Well, may I recommend liberalism to you? Because we balance that freedom of the individual with the communities all the time. It's why we're, really proud of our record in local government. But it's actually more than that. It's about where the power sits. And power it's not just about with the person. It's as much the person in that community. And there is a balance to be struck. That comes first, and then that forms wider society. So I would argue that the answer to many of your questions might be liberalism.
Right, let's go on to the specific ideas, and you're absolutely right. That quote I read at the beginning was from a speech you made at the conference. There is something else you do say in the book, is a society with a lot of marriage is strong enough to support everyone else whose lives, for whatever reason, do not fit the traditional pattern. Are you saying that aspiring to live a life outside of marriage is not what individuals should aim for?
I'm not saying should. I'm not in the judgment business. But I am as a politician.
Very true.
No, well, with respect, I'm not. It's not my job to judge anybody, and it's none of my business how people choose to live. But as a politician, responsible as an MP, for the context in which we all live, government has to generalise. Government has to say, we think these models of living are generally helpful. And I personally believe that family stability is generally helpful. So what are we doing to support families? And a lot of that is about Angela's economic agenda.
Yes.
But I think there's also some value in saying, if people are married, that's a good thing, and we should help them.
Do you think what Danny is saying will strike a chord with communities across the UK?
I think the chord that it'll strike is it leaves many people outside of the norm, and we've been in situations where government has lectured about what sort of families there ought to be. And how they ought to be run, and problematised lone parents.
But did you hear me lecturing just now?
No,
Angela?
I didn't.
So am I lecturing?
But unfortunately, those kinds of comments sound that way and are often taken.
But you don't think that's what I meant?
Way. Well, what I would say is that I will give you the benefit of the doubt because you've just asserted that. But as an LGBT person, that kind of quote doesn't include me. Quite a lot of the sort of family, faith and flag stuff that you're talking about does not include equality for women. It doesn't include LGBT people who don't fit the norms.
I think most of my friends, in our 40s and
it is
very younger, we just don't really
nostalgic.
think of... I agree with the sort of the family idea. I just think that the way that families are formed, 50% of marriages don't work out. I do think that you can support families.
Yes.
And it doesn't have this piece of paper. I mean, I've got more and more of my friends who just will never want the piece of paper, but actually do want the stability. They do want to create a wider network where we support each other. And more people are finding they have to look after their elderly parents whilst having children at the same time. I think this is by all means, let's have the conversation. I'm just not sure I agree with sort of the language you're using to express it, but,
Well, let me introduce Henry Hill. Finally, you've made it. Were you aiming for next Monday's programme?
The car company was, as far as I can tell.
OK. Anyway, Henry Hill from Conservative Home, you're welcome. You've come in halfway through this discussion, but I think you know the substance. The group that Danny Kruger is part of in terms of the Conservative Party, National Conservatives, I mean, how much influence do they have within Conservative Party and their thinking?
Well, the Conservative Party is sort of, as the famous saying goes, absolute monarchy mediated by regicide, right? So in terms of government...
regicide.
Frequent regicide. Increasingly frequent regicide, but nonetheless. So while it's in government, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are pretty much fully in command of policy, and I think you can see that from the decisions they're making. The interesting question is going to be, if the government loses office next year, and there's a massive turf war about the future of the Conservative Party, Danny's case is going to be one of the ones that's being put to MPs in the membership.
Right, so you think it will strike a chord within the party? With
some of them, certainly, because one of the big questions for Conservative MPs and activists, regardless of which wing of the party you're in, is that we've been in office for 13 years and achieved so little.
Right, well, let's talk about some of the policies. We'll pull out this one, Danny. In the book, you talk of how the tax system doesn't take account for family circumstances. You say the benefit system subsidises separation as people would earn more living separately. How so?
Well, the whole way that's exactly what happens. And there's all sorts of ways in which the tax and benefit system at the moment incentivises quite naturally, and I don't really blame the decision-making behind it, but what we need to be doing is countervailing that tendency of the tax system that basically pays people to either to live apart or, including with childcare, with social care, to, as it were, outsource looking after your relatives to other agencies. We need to be endorsing the decisions that most people want to make, which is to look after look after themselves and look after each other.
That sounds a bit like asking women to go back into the home.
It doesn't, though, Angela. And
honestly,
thank you for making that point. And Layla made a point earlier along the same lines that this is somehow backward-looking. It's absolutely the opposite. I don't want to turn the clock back a single moment. What I do want to do is to support and respect the decisions that men and women make, that they would like to spend more time at home. And we mentioned the pandemic earlier. What we need, and I feel this personally, I'd love to be able to spend more time working from home, not commuting so long, playing a part in my local community. That is something that men and women would do equally.
Would changing the
equal society.
Right, but would changing the tax system do that? Because you recommend taxing households, not the first time it's been suggested, rather than individuals, for example, which would sort of lend itself to what Angela has said, that actually, are you really wanting women to stay at home and not?
I am not, and I'm the son of a working woman, I'm the husband of a working woman. I mean, this idea of the 1950s as this goal for Conservatives, it was a strange anomaly in which is very unnatural. Of course, women would want to have a full career and play a part in the economy. They'd also like to have the chance to spend time with their children, particularly when they're young, as would dads. So this is, I'm afraid, please don't caricature. It's not old-fashioned.
Well, let's make a case.
Even among married couples, quite often these days, the joint bank account is there for some stuff, but most people have their own. And, to be taxed completely as a whole, just because you happen to live...
It's a voluntary thing. If you would like to have
it's voluntary?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yes, so if you would like to be able... Yes, of course it should be. So if you... not compulsory.
That's not how I view tax. Tax is not
if you want to choose to be taxed as a family unit, you should be able to, which would leave you better off. So you should be able to transfer the personal allowance between spouses, for instance, and you should be regarded as an economic unit, which, by the way, is how almost every other developed country, including most European countries, do things, which is to recognise that the family is an economic unit, not the individual.
Well, let Angela respond to that. Should the tax system be used to shape society in some way?
Well, we know that what would happen if that was the case, almost certainly that the carers would become the women.
They are already now. Yeah.
Yes, but the issue is that then there'd be economic incentives that drive women back.
I think so long as choice goes both ways. So you can choose to do that, but actually extricating yourself from that can be very problematic. We've seen it in other parts of the tax system where, particularly with benefits, there was a time where if you did separate, the benefits of one did affect the other. And actually what it ended up doing was incentivising women who were in domestic abuse situations to not leave, because actually there was a financial penalty to doing that. I'm with you on individual choice within the family unit, support the family unit, absolutely. Tax system's one bit, but I'd love I don't know, I haven't read your book, I'm sorry, I apologise, but, children's centres and hubs where families can get real support and care. And at the moment, I don't think the government's got that right.
They've got hub
there are family... Yeah, but excuse me,
down.
No, sorry, the reality of family hubs...
Hang on.
All right, well, let me just...
The reality of family hubs, just to talk about that, though, they're too far away. And I agree with your neighbourhood model. Let's have a family hub in every neighbourhood where people could walk to. Absolutely, that hopefully we could agree on.
Henry.
I think it's also worth just noting that there is no such thing as a neutral tax system. The tax system shapes society now
by credits and
incentivising a model where people go back to work as soon as possible. Now, the fact is, if you have a system that encourages, facilitates and maximises individual choice, that is, at times, going to produce outcomes at the macro level in terms of overall who does what, which are not going to please some people. The net effect probably would be some negative impact on female workforce participation rate. The question is, if that arises because of genuinely free choice in a flexible system that better reflects what they actually want, is that a bad thing?
Yes, and I mean, this is difficult for me to say as a man, and I get in trouble when I do say it. But I mean, I point to all the many female colleagues who make the same point, that actually the evidence shows that many women would like to spend more time at home in the early months and years of their child's life, but they are required by the incentives of the economy. Wait a second. Well, I agree with that, but no, we're just talking about women. So let me finish the point. Let me finish the point. Many women would like to spend more time with their families in the very early months and years, but they can't because of the economics of their family life. If we believe in choice, I think we should be supporting them to make that decision. And of course, it applies to men as well. And I take Angela's point that at the moment, the way our culture works is most likely to be women. It doesn't have to be, and it should be up to the family how to balance their respective roles.
Well, some of the Nordic countries have done that, and they've actually increased parental leave, and they've said that it has to be taken by the man, because that allows much more of a bonding. And I think during the pandemic, when there was a lockdown, I certainly saw a lot more family events happening, going out with bicycles. I saw a lot more men with their children. But you have to facilitate that economically. You can't say it's a choice when actually the reality is...
Let's talk a bit more. Hang on. It sounds like you support making Men's Day.
Right, well, let's talk about helping perhaps different parts of society economically, because this headline in the Financial Times, you mentioned Tony Blair at the beginning of the programme, Danny. Labour cannot fix UK through tax and spend, says Tony Blair. It was an interview with the former Labour Prime Minister. He said Keir Starmer should stay in the centre ground and not equate being radical with just taxing and spending. He added that being radical in today's politics is about harnessing the technological revolution. But how do you transform society today without spending money, Angela?
Well, you can certainly see that you can spend an awful lot of money and not transform society, because that's what Conservatives have done for the
that's not the question I asked.
So it doesn't necessarily follow that a transformation is always about tax and spending. It can be about reprioritising within existing envelopes. So, for example, ending the non-dom tax status, or ending the particular tax status of public schools allows you to
day-to-day spending by government. Those are very small amounts of money.
But this is what you have to do. At the moment, we've got the highest tax burden since the 1970s, and we've got crumbling public sphere, and we've got rising levels of poverty, and we've got a cost of living crisis, and we've got a huge explosion in food bank usage.
All right.
And people who are at work can't make ends meet.
But which of the big ticket spending items would you cut? Health, education, social care? That's where you'd find the money for a crumbling social.
And I'll come back to reprioritise, and that's what the Labour government
wants to do.
Well, let's have a look. Well, let's have a look at some of the priorities. We've got Matt Rack from the Fire Brigades Union, but he's also the newly elected president of the Trades Union Congress, and they had their conference this week. Matt, do you agree with Tony Blair and Angela that a government can be radical without spending money?
Well, no, I don't. I think clearly the question of investment in public services, for example, is vital to millions of people, and was reflected in the debate of the Trades Union Congress this week. But equally, investment isn't the only thing. There are issues like rights and the balance of power in society that need to be addressed as well. If I take one example, the rights of trade unions have been under attack for 40 years, and the trade unions are very clear to Labour that we want to see some of those rights returned. We want to see the anti-union laws reversed.
Right.
So, and actually that alters the balance of power in the workplace. And the balance of power more widely in society.
Yes, well, Labour has said well, Angela Rayner said that she was going to do, or Labour were going to do that. But you've said that people don't want to see austerity wearing a different colour rosette. Is that what you think Keir Starmer is offering?
Well, that's a debate that's still going on. We've been very clear, and I think the trade union movement is very clear, that we want to see a radical government. People want to change. People are sick and tired of more than 13 years of an austerity government that has slashed and destroyed public services so that many of them are on their knees. Record cuts in my own service.
Right, so you do want a Labour government, if it wins the election next year, to spend money to do the opposite of what you think the Tories have done?
Well, that's clear that right. There are many demands.
But they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. They've said very clearly, whether it's Rachel Reeves, whether it's Angela Eagle sitting here or Keir Starmer, we are not going to play fast and loose with people's money.
Well, no one's asking anyone to play fast and loose with anything, are they? That's not what the trade union movement has said this week. What we're saying is we need a serious discussion about investment in public services. We face a climate crisis. To tackle that, there needs to be investment. And I think
how much investment
anyone who denies that, denying reality.
No, well, how much investment are you talking about?
Well, clearly significant investment to begin to reverse the years of wrecking that has gone on under this government.
Right, well, Angela, hang on.
Can I just say congratulations, Matt, on your becoming president of the TUC Congress. And having been at parts of the TUC Congress, there was a really energised, optimistic air about it, unlike anything
but they
I've
want
seen
more money to be
for
spent
years.
to reverse
Now,
the decline in public
if you look-
services.
if you
And
look,
Angela,
for example,
I'm asking you a question that people want to know the answer to, which is, are you going to commit to spending billions of pounds in investment, all right, not day-to-day spending, in terms of reversing the decline, as Matt Rack sees it, in public services?
For example, if you look at what we've said about meeting the climate challenge, if we're going to get to net zero by 2030, we have to transform the way our economy works and do that with investment.
Right, but that's been pushed back. It's not going to be in the first year.
Well, you can't spend it all in year one, but you have to set out plans to do these transformations. So I think that if you look at, for example, at Angela Rayner's New Deal for working people, she got standing ovation at the TUC Congress after she outlined some of that earlier in the week. That will, as Matt has already said, transform the nature of relationships at work and empower workers in their workplaces so that they can ensure that they get a fairer deal in terms
do you think people
return for pay.
Like Matt are going to be disappointed by a Labour government if it wins next year in terms of that investment?
Yeah, almost certainly. It's just, compared to the new Labour, Starmer, with the best will in the world, is coming into an incredibly different fiscal situation. Taxes are already very high. Public services are strained. There is not going to be, and we are no longer in an era of zero interest rates. So there's not going to be a lot of scope for vast transformative spending. The one area he might have done it, planning reform. He was talking a really good game on planning reform. If he'd been bold, he could have windfall taxed the land value uplift. It would have been a magic money tree, and he could have built a ton of houses in Tory seats. And that would have actually potentially kickstarted the economy. But sadly, he chose tactical expediency over that. And so instead, we're going to stay a country where rents are crushing, houses are unaffordable. Large parts of southwest England have avoidable drought every summer because we have allowed Vale of Whitehorse District Council to veto the reservoir.
That's not what's
that is exactly what.
All right, before we get too migrant,
you cannot transform the country from the centre ground. Because the centre ground is just a compromise.
But you can transform it without spending money.
I wish we could.
You could transform it. The one way you could transform this country without spending money is planning reform.
You have to grow the
economy.
economy.
You make money.
Liberal Democrats would like to tax people a bit more, would they?
No. Well, look, it's not for me to say. I will say that every manifesto has been absolutely added up and endorsed by.
Yeah, but in previous manifestos you have committed.
Yeah, but that was a complete. I mean, as you've said, we are in a completely different fiscal.
So you're not going to do anything different either.
Because of Liz Truss tanking the economy and Rishi Sunak nowhere near sorting out. We've got. The issue I have with where we are now, I don't think that the envelope's going to be massive, and I don't think any of us, there is not going to be any giveaway manifestos from anyone. I think the question was, can you be radical? Can you do stuff within that envelope? And the answer is yes. So let's take the Vale of Whitehorse as an example. When we took over as Liberal Democrats of that, the Tories had left it in a state where it was going to go bust within 5 years. Its most recent audit has said that we've now sorted that out. But meanwhile, what we have done is basically ended homelessness in the area. We put the environment first, and we are building more homes, including social homes and homes that are genuinely affordable. That is what you get when you get Liberal Democrats in charge instead of Tories.
Matt, how are you going to hold Labour's feet to the fire on the things that you want?
Well, it's part of a process, isn't it? There's going to be a debate in the run-up to Labour's manifesto. We're part of that process. Within the Labour Party as an affiliate. We went to Labour's National Policy Forum. We didn't get our own way on everything, but we'll carry on arguing our corner, both as an individual affiliate and as part of the wider trade union movement. There is an agenda that we want as the Fire Brigade Union. There's also a wider agenda that the trade union movement is pushing. And that's a debate to be had. We welcome much of what Angela Rayner said, as has been said earlier. And our job is to push the policies that our members have voted through our democratic structures.
Matt Rack, thank you very much. On the issue of strikes, Angela Eagle, that is, sorry, just to come back. Well, I mean, we have Labour politicians in the studio arguing that all the strikes that have happened over the recent years will stop or be less. Will we have fewer strikes if a Labour government comes in next year?
Well, I think that what we need to make certain is that employment pays a living wage. And so there'll be a whole range of things that we do to try to take away
right.
the worries that have caused strikes and the cost of living crisis that have caused strikes.
That's all we've got time for. Thank you to everyone for joining me, even Henry, towards the end. And I'll be back next week. Bye-bye.